Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Double O Film Strip, where I, your Film Strip co-host Jay, along with a guest, explore a single entry from each of the eras of James Bond. And today, we're here to talk about Goldeneye, featuring Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, Sean Bean as Alex Trevelyan, 006, Isabella Scoruppo as Natalia Simonov, Famke Jensen as Xenia Onatop, and Jodan Baker as Jack Wade, Robbie Coltrane as Zukovsky, and Alan Cumming as Boris Grishenko, and of course Dame Judi Dench as M. Directed by Martin Campbell, who did Casino Royale, which is a previous film strip. You can listen to me and Lindsay talk about that. This one came out in 1995, made over $356 million at the box office, and really was a shot of adrenaline in the arm to the franchise. And I can't wait to talk about it today with my very special guest, good friend of the show, Preston Mitchell, who I did like one of the first Bond things we've ever done here with. We did From Russia with Love years ago. Preston, what's up, man? Glad to have you back on Film Strip.
Oh, well, Jay, thank you again for having me. I feel like I have a lot to live up to with that prologue that you just did. No, but always a pleasure to come back on Film Strip. I had a really great time talking From Russia with Love with you prior, and I think Goldeneye is, when you let the cat out of the bag, we are talking about Goldeneye. I feel like in a weird way, there's a few similarities. Not to say that it's just like some remake or reimagining of the Connery era, but I feel like there's a lot of prescience going on that's very analogous to that episode that we did. So I'm happy upon rewatch. I'm always happy to watch Goldeneye. For the record, spoiler alert: this is one of my all-time top 5 favorite Bond films ever. But watching it for a podcast for the first time ever yesterday, I was just like, oh wow, there's a lot here. I thought I was just gonna get just fun action 90s, the Bros in his prime, that kind of thing, and you get that. But there's Campbell had a lot on his mind, and I think there's a very clear reason why they tapped him for the following Bond cycle to kick that off as well. So I'm really excited to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, we talked a little bit about this on the From Russia with Love episode, but what's your background with Bond? What was your first James Bond movie? And then who do you consider to be, quote, your Bond?
Well, my first Bond movie, and before I say what I'm about to say, keep in mind, if you haven't heard the From Russia with Love episode, I think I admitted it on that one as well. But my very first Bond was Die Another Day. And so and it's a movie that I can't bring myself to completely hate, even though by the year it ages like milk. I acknowledge that, but hey, you gotta start somewhere. And I'm a kid of the late 90s, early 2000s, and that kind of opened up even though that was the last Brosnan, that was around the same time as 007 Everything or Nothing, which is considered one of the better James Bond video games.
Good game, yeah.
And of course, having older cousins and friends and stuff like that who had ties to the N64, GoldenEye was still pretty huge for people in my age group. And so Brosnan was always his movies were always on TV, like his Bond movies, that is. And I feel like I was just around his vibe a lot of times. But my mother was a Connery person. My mother, loves Sean Connery, period. That's one of her all-time favorite movie stars. And she always argued that he was the best James Bond. So it was actually about when I was 8 or 9 years old. I ended up watching every few holiday seasons the James Bond marathons. That's something I miss about cable, is that I feel like that was such an event.
The 15 Days of 007 thing that TBS TNT would run.
Yeah, Spike TV, that whole thing. And so I really fell for each Bond actor because of that. And even though I don't love every Bond movie, but I do have a love for each Bond actor for very different reasons. So I guess I come to the franchise with that visage. And even though I grew up in the Brosnan era, with the influence of my family, with Connery, I love him. And I even enjoy the campiness of Roger Moore. I think growing up a Brosnan kid kind of helped. I I do think my James Bond at this point, because 15 years of my life has been the Craig movies. My formative life, that is, like from middle school all the way up until like graduating college. But like, and then No Time to Die came out a few years later. Um, the Craig era, even though I would argue it's the weirdest Bond cycle in a lot of ways, there's a lot that, and I'm sure a subsequent guest is going to talk about Craig at some point. This is about Brosnan, but there's a lot that I love about Craig, both as an actor and also what he brought to the table as Bond. And so, I in fact, ultimately, I end up defending a lot of the issues that people have with the Craig movies quite a bit, partially because he does his cycle of Bond does mean a lot to me because that is where I came up in life. So yeah, I would say that's my James Bond.
Very cool. Very cool. So that, yeah, Brosnan was the first one you saw. Was Die Another Day. When's the first time you saw Goldeneye?
It was shortly after. It was, and I'm pretty sure my older brother, when I told him how much I loved this movie, he was just like, "Well, you should see Goldeneye then." So that I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Goldeneye was the second one that I watched like all the way through. Like I think, like actually, now that I remember correctly, we used to have DVDs of the first Bond DVDs that I had were Die Another Day and The World Is Not Enough, which ironically enough is actually not one of my favorite Bonds. But as a kid, that's all I had. So I had those two.
You go with what you got.
I would have to wait like every few months to watch the marathons to see the Bonds that were unassailably better than the two that I had on DVD. And then eventually, I think around the time Casino Royale came out, they being MGM trying to, because this series has gone through a lot of distribution wrangling ever since my preteens. But MGM at the time, they put out this 20 film set. It was the 40th anniversary, I want to say, or after the 40th anniversary. And so that was my first time owning the first 40 years of Bond in a DVD set. And ever since, I now own the Blu-rays. Like I even, I have, I know how divisive it is, but I am a fan of No Time to Die. I do own it on 4K. I suspect I'll probably get the 4Ks of the rest of the films eventually. So yeah, I mean, this series is I'm a movie fan. I'm more of a movie lover than a movie fan. Like I love different directors, different genres, etc. But like, there's very few franchises that I just geek out about like this. And rewatching Goldeneye, I could not help it, Jay. I could not help it. Like once I heard that For England, James, I was like, okay, this just Bond just gets my blood going, unlike any other franchise. I just don't know what it is.
No, I get you. And listen, I'm about to carbon date myself here with my first time of seeing Goldeneye because I saw it in theaters the fall semester of my freshman year of college. So, yeah. So anyway, I've been the old guy on film strip forever. So, but that's okay because I remember when this was coming out. Because growing up, as I've said on the other podcasts and stuff, I grew up with Bond, and I don't need to repeat all of that here on this one, but I would keep up with what's going on, and I knew that there would been this long production of it, and this was right when the internet was really becoming a thing, and IMDb was like a frames site, and you could keep up with a little bit, but Entertainment Weekly was where you got your news if you were into movies, and
Wow.
I didn't have a subscription to it, but the library did, so I would go and snag that every time it would come in and read it at like lunch or whatever. And I remember them saying, "Oh, they've cast Pierce Brosnan finally," because I knew he was supposed to be it before, and then the Remington Steele thing had knocked him out of it.
Yeah.
So I was like, "Okay, cool. They're going to get another suave actor to come in and do this." And then I remember going to see this movie in theaters. I think I even went with like my whole family. It was like a thing, it was right around. It came out a little bit before Thanksgiving, and so I think we probably went on Thanksgiving. It used to be a tradition to go, and I remember watching that and just being absolutely blown away. Because I was like, man, this is like all the fun of Roger Moore's era, who was really my Bond growing up and things like that. Because that was when I grew up and was sort of watching Bond. But it's all the fun of that, but with all the like brutality of Sean Connery too, married into this very topical script. And that's what kind of blew me away because Bonnie kind of skirted around like the era it was in for a long time. Like they're just trying to not be to iconoclastic about things, and then this movie comes out, and you've got the whole bit with Judi Dench going like, "You're a relic of the Cold War," and she's pretty much talking about the franchise, not just the character. And I'm going like, man, this is bold. Like, I like it. But then you get to go through and have all the fun with James Bond that you want to have, along with the seriousness. And at this point, I knew who Sean Bean was because every time he showed up in a movie, I was like, that's either the bad guy or he's gonna die. And I'd already figured that out at that point in his career. Now he's just known as Dead Meat. Sean
And at the
Bean.
beginning,
So,
he dies. Literally.
yes, exactly, and he does. And everything but National Treasure. He doesn't die in that one because that's kind of a kids movie. But I expected him to. I thought Nicolas Cage was going to kill Sean Bean. But anyway, so I saw this in college, man, and then loved it. And I own the VHS. I still have the VHS of this, and I remember. Again, just being enamored with it. And then I didn't really play the N64 and all that stuff, but I had friends who did. So they had the game. And so I got to experience it a whole new way with that. And that's always fun when, I talk to different people. I think Mike from Amateur Artours even mentioned it when we were talking about Dalton. He said, man, I got introduced to James Bond playing video games in a lot of ways. And it was the Goldeneye game. And I was like, of all the James Bond games they've made, and they've done a few of them, and some of them are good, some of them are kind of that's the one that lasts forever. Like that's an incredible, fun thing to do. And it really put a stamp on, for the Broccolis in particular, that this franchise is not too old. It's not 30 years too old. It's not dead. We can still do this and carry it on. And I always credited Pierce Brosnan, in particular this movie, but really him, and it's kind of a shame he only got 4 movies to really show off and do stuff, that he really was the adrenaline shot back into the franchise that it needed, and has carried it on and into the modern era. And I don't know, it's a lot of fun to go back. It's been a while since I saw this one. And fun story, I was actually visiting film strip co-host Lindsay in where she lives, and her husband both like Bond. They love this movie, and so when I was up there, we actually all got to watch it together. And so I watched it again for the podcast,
awesome.
but I got to watch it with them, and that was a blast. And so this is one that I will just come back to, though. And if it's on, if I'm flipping through something and I see it on, on streaming or something, I'll stop and watch a few minutes of it because it always sucks me in, and it's such a fun movie, and I can't wait to get into it with you. So I'm going to do our kind of 30,000 foot plot thing here, and then we're going to go through our discussion. And for those that may be just joining in, if you're just joining this version of the 00 film strip, we do this a little differently than we do normal film strip. We have about 8 or 9 categories we're going to hit that kind of signify what Bond's all about, and we're going to talk about them. But if you're not sure what Goldeneye is about, the straightest line through it I can give you is this. When Alex Trevelyan, played by Sean Bean, a former 00 agent is presumed dead, resurfaces as Janice, a ruthless criminal mastermind driven by a deep-seated betrayal of MI6. He steals a powerful satellite weapon system called the Goldeneye from a Russian research facility. This weapon is capable of triggering a global financial collapse with basically an EMP blast, plunging the world into chaos. He's also helped along the way by a rogue Russian general who wants to reestablish the Stalin era. So Bond is tasked with recovering Goldeneye and embarks on this globetrotting adventure to take him from the Swiss Alps to the streets of St. Petersburg. He encounters Natalia Simonova, a brilliant Russian programmer who assists him in his mission. She was working on the Goldeneye project, actually. And together they have to outmaneuver Trevelyan and his lethal accomplice, Xenia Onatop. One of the wildest named Bond hinge people ever. We'll talk about Famke Janssen, who derives pleasure from killing, and I'm putting that mildly. The climax unfolds at a communications facility in Monte Carlo, where Bond and Natalia race against time to prevent Trevelyan from activating the Goldeneye. And in a thrilling confrontation, Bond ultimately defeats his old friend, destroying the weapon and thwarting plans for global domination. And that's the through line of Goldeneye. Let's get into it as we go. Every Bond movie has a great setup, and when it's the first Bond of a new era, they've got to introduce this character to us, right? They basically had Timothy Dalton climb the Rock of Gibraltar and then swing around with wind blowing in his flowing hair and stuff. And I'm like, how are they going to introduce this James Bond? And they basically have James Bond run along the side of a dam and do this incredible free fall dive into that chemical facility. And I know that's not Brosnan doing it, but what a heck of a stunt, man. That's a great way to kick off a movie.
It's one of the best opening stunts in the franchise, in my opinion, because it lets you know from the jump, even though you've never seen this Bond before at the time this movie's out, you haven't seen Brosnan in the role yet on a film. And so you automatically know that there's a sense of courage. he might feel a sense of danger, but then he gets over it really quickly because he's James Bond. And the way that Campbell shoots that is so exhilarating, and it perfectly sets up what the rest of the cold open is going to encompass.
Oh, it's not only the shooting too; it's the sound work on that, where you hear the rope and the bungee cord like clank and pull
Yes,
tight and stuff. I'm like, now a lesser movie would have drowned that with music, but it's just wind and then shink. And this one, it's like that's a real thing. They jumped a guy off that dam to make that work, and then of course he infiltrates the facility with Sean Bean. Of course, they get the drop on him gets by the Russians, and they have a hell of a shootout. I'd forgotten like the gunplay in this movie is amazing. Like there's a lot
it
of
is.
lot of machine guns and a lot of shooting going on, and while they're setting up bombs and all this stuff, it's a pretty
Well,
packed moment.
well, Jay, right before that though, something I was gonna say was after that amazing like sound design with the rope like where the rope like what do you call it stretches out
There it clinches,
and
yeah,
and and like I love that quick shot where and I think they might have like CG'd Brosnan like a bit of Brosnan's face on it like in post or something, but where like he shoots the grappling gun and it hits the other side of the
yeah.
dam. And you see that quick shot of Brosnan's face, and it's just like, oh my god,
A great
that's
inset shot, like they hung him and had him do the thing, and then it's just good editing, man. So it's really really well done. I agree. And even when he's infiltrating the facility, like he's basically coming down upside down, and then the guy's the Russian guy's sitting on the toilet, and he pulls the paper down, and he's just like hello, and he punches him in the face, and I'm like, okay,
yeah.
so we've just set up everything that Brosnan's going to be about as Bond. He's going to be action packed. He's going to be suave, but he's also going to be
Quippy.
quippy. And I'm like, this is Pierce Brosnan. Like I didn't watch a lot of Remington Steele, but I watched
Mhm.
enough of it to know who he was. And I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted and expected in Bond. At this point, because it was a return to the action-packed side, which Dalton definitely had that, but it was also a return to a little bit of the fun. Like Connery
Yeah.
had a lot of fun. Moore definitely had a lot of fun. They wanted to put a little bit of that humor back in it because in the '90s, I mean, you got to remember where movies were in the '90s, man. We were coming into the Tarantino era, and it was all these indie directors and
That's true.
raw stuff, and you're gonna do this big budget, franchise movie like this. It was a gamble to do, and they are setting it all up great. And
The
then, like we
old
say,
movie
into that
franchise
incredible
too.
shootout is awesome with all the barrels flying around and the chemical
Oh
facility and
god.
stuff.
It's so good. Well, going back to that gamble part for a second, like Jay, something I have in my notes that I was actually going to ask you was, like you mentioned like how mind blowing this was for you when it came out, but how was the perception of the franchise between Living Daylights and this one? And I asked that
Hmm.
because I know that this was originally slated to be the third Dalton movie, and it was partially because of the hiatus, the end of the Cold War in '89 when License to Kill came out. Like that kind of elongation is what made Dalton disinterested. At least that's what reports say. So I'm very curious, like, what was it like? Because again, Brosnan, older Brosnan, like towards the end of the '90s, 2000s, like that was my entry point to Bond. So I'm curious, what was the malaise before that?
I mean, everyone had almost forgotten about it, Preston. Like the
Wow.
last, License to Kill made money and stuff, but it was such a departure from what had been that people just didn't really respond to it. It's one of those that's gotten the critical reevaluation, and it's a fine movie. Again, I don't love it, but it's a fine movie, and I'm glad people do like it. I mean, but it had left on such a note where everybody was like, is James Bond even relevant anymore? Do we need that? The Cold War's over, and that's why
Mm,
they wrote that whole bit with Judy Dench that we'll talk about and all that, where she basically says like, I don't think we need you anymore. I don't think this is what we do anymore. We were coming into the technology and computer age where espionage was about to change greatly.
yeah.
But the idea was, and they even carry this on through the Craig things. Every now and then you have to have somebody that can pull the trigger. You can't just press the buttons. You got to have somebody that can talk to people, move assets, all that stuff. And so the gamble of it was like, is this going to still be relevant in a post Die Hard Lethal Weapon world? Speed hadn't come out
Batman.
quite yet, but
89 was
action
Batman.
movies were in a different place. We had come out of the Rambo Schwarzenegger era of things,
Yeah.
and all that, and we had done T2, which was this massive thing, and so how can you have James Bond in the midst of all of that? And the way you do it is you you find the right actor, you get the right script, and you absolutely get the right director in Martin Campbell, who had been part of the franchise, understood what it needed, and really infused it with a lot of energy. And so you have all the 90s sheen that big budget movies had at the time, but without them feeling false or fake, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So
No, it
like
does.
the idea was that, like, hey, this was who they wanted 10 years ago anyway. So can he still do it? And what does it look like? And then from the opening, I mean, when the trailers came out, everyone was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be cool. I don't know if it's gonna be good, but it's gonna be cool because Pierce Brosnan is friggin' cool, and I mean that's really what it was. And then again, you put him up against a great cast of folks here who are doing things, and we'll get into the different characters, but he's
One of the
so well
best
matched.
ensembles of villains in a Bond movie ever. I think this actually might be my favorite villain ensemble, like in any
Yeah,
Bond movie
it's a
ever. Actually,
good match of villains. It really is because they're the mix of the the archetype that you want, also the kind of the wronged person that you almost kind of get behind their plight, and then just the crazy one, which is the on a top character. So you get all of the Bond stuff in one movie, but it really is a greatest hits of Bond things. And I think that's why it landed so well and worked for people, man. And the other thing that doesn't hurt is, again, the action sequence great, and then James Bond, eat your heart out, Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible, jumps a motorcycle off a freaking cliff and catches an airplane. I mean,
that
that's
is pretty
another. You
awesome.
have two incredible jump stunts in the first 15 minutes of this movie. It's awesome.
Well, and that's what the opening. It also kind of establishes. So I think in retrospect, watching it now on a big TV as opposed to when I was a kid watching it on cable, like little tiny TVs like we had throughout the 2000s, or at least that I had. I don't know if other
Yeah, yeah,
people are.
same. I had the same 14-inch television for years. So yeah,
Well, like I think the flaws of the CGI are more visible. That's one of the few things I'll ding this movie on. But what makes it age even probably even better than it did back in '95 is the fact that it was returned to practical stunts. Like comparing this to the previous two films starring Dalton, there's a lot of practical stunt work. Like I think Dalton is underrated as far as being a pugilist because I don't think Bond movies before Craig necessarily as big of a fan as I am of the franchise. I will say like I don't necessarily go to them for like fisticuffs or like fight scenes and stuff like that. It's all about the set pieces. And
yeah,
I think Brosnan really helped bring that into the new millennium and really showing what James Bond can do. Like, oh, you're actually a secret agent, like you're special ops, you're a commander, like he is in the books, the Fleming novels. And I mean, just like the fact that he like runs people over with the motorcycle, like and like he like the Russian army men like are having to like dodge him because like that one guy in that one frame is like literally have to jump away from Bond, like because like, dude, I'll literally run you over. I have a license to kill. But once he jumps on the plane, and the suspense of like, James Bond's gonna get out of it, of course, but like the Wile E. Coyote, like having to twist
yeah. Pull the stick up and try to pull it off the mountain. Yeah.
and that's just the opening,
Hmm.
and then it all segues into what I have mixed feelings about the music of this movie, but the actual opening credits by Daniel Kleinman, it being his debut
Yeah.
opening credit sequence, he gets everything right about Binder, and then also again ushers everything into the new millennium using stark Soviet Union demolishing plus Yanis
Mhm.
iconography. That's something I definitely wrote down when watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole Janice thing, the two sides of the face and stuff. This years later, when I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they have a character where this gets used again. That idol, and it's kind of a twist. It's one of the Halloween episodes. It's one of the better Buffy episodes because everybody becomes their costume, and it's sort of a joke. It's in there. So really, really good episode. Like, you can go look it up. But I knew about that. Legend and everything like that. And so to watch that title sequence now with all the two faces going around and stuff, it had never really hit me before that I was like, oh gosh, they're playing that in the opening sequence. And what a great way of doing it. Because like you call out Daniel Kleinman, he's done every one of these since, from Goldeneye forward except Quantum of Solace, which I don't know if anybody really worked on that movie. It doesn't sound like anyone did. Nobody wants to ever own any of it. I'll tell you that. Poor Olga Kurylenko did get a good shake on that. But either way, they do that, and I'll tell you, the first time, like when watching the movie, I knew that, like, okay, Tina Turner's doing the theme song. That's cool. I didn't know Bono and the Edge were doing things. I don't know how you feel about U2. I'm not a huge fan personally. Um, but I know Bono and the Edge did a lot of scoring and stuff like that. But it was a neat thing I noticed is that the Goldeneye song does not get folded into the music of this movie at all. It was done separately because
Yeah.
they had Ace of Base doing a song and then decided the record company moved or something, and so they no longer could work the license out. So they ended up reworking that song for a thing called The Juvenile, which is a hit of theirs. But this song done by Bono and the Edge was sort of a last or a late thing, and it wasn't part of the music. So that's why you don't hear it like the dun dun dun. You don't hear that in there,
Yeah.
any of those minor keys and stuff. And so it sticks out different. And the first time I heard it, I thought, I don't know how I feel about this. And then when I saw the movie again, when it came out on cable or on the VHS, I was like, no, this song is very cool. And
It grows on you.
it sets the tone, right? It's just this kind of smoky, cool. You got Tina's big, raspy, soulful voice, and then just those understated strings and those kind of quick hits and stuff. It's just a neat orchestration, man. I really, really dig this song. It's top 5 for me. I'll go ahead and spoil that out for you.
Oh wow, wow. No, I like the song quite a bit. And this movie entirely is nostalgic for me. So anytime the opening credits come on, like I sing along, like Golden, like
It's an
um,
earworm. It gets in your head. So
it gets in your ear like a Bond song should. Tina Turner, like for the time, I can see how that might have been weird, like Tina Turner vocals and then Bono on the Edge. And I'm not a big U2 guy either. I do listen to a lot of rock music, but U2 never really clicked with me. But I do like the writing on this, and yeah, it's just a really cool track, and in an era where I feel like I guess it's going to be a precursor to our session later on, but I feel like the Brosnan era is kind of where the theme songs get spotty for me because like I feel like now the world's not enough. Again, I don't love the movie now, but the theme song to that, I feel like I wish more modern Bond songs had that vibe because I feel like that song really gets until Skyfall really gets like the Bonnie nature of it all. But that's just me.
Oh no, and I'm with you, but it's a great opening title sequence because, like you say, you've got all the Janus iconography with all the fallen Soviet Union, the walls fallen at this point that they've gone down, and but it's still sort of like all the statues of Lenin and Stalin, they're still sort of halfway hanging on, So the idea is that, oh, this is about people that are trying to hang on to that or trying to reestablish that regime. And then you've
Right.
got the betrayal part of it, which is the Two-Face side. That's going to be the 006 character.
The
And
gun coming out of
yeah, the
the
gun
woman's
coming
mouth.
out. Yeah, and all the stuff. It's just a really good title sequence. And after coming off such an action-packed opening, it's sort of a way to kind of like, okay, everybody sit down. We're going to cool out for a little bit. We're just gonna smooth through, and then Tina, of course, is just rasping it out for us at the end, as only she can. God bless you, Tina. You were an amazing performer. But yeah, and then we get into the movie, and so we're kind of at the point where we talk about the case file, which is sort of the thing. What are we doing, and what do you make of this idea of like the Goldeneye EMP weapon? Something that can disrupt all of our modern technology and stuff. It seems so like nowadays it's a real thing, but in the 90s, I was like, that can't really work, right? That seems wild.
It's interesting because growing up, the early Brosnan movies, specifically this one and Tomorrow Never Dies, I feel like those plots they felt very spy-fi. They felt very much like because I can say this as a kid, like even as a millennial, like they felt like throwbacks to the Moore era, where the plots of those movies they got very spy-fi, especially compared to Lazenby and definitely Connery. And nowadays, watching both of these in particular, it's like okay, they inadvertently predicted where millionaires would go as far as like controlling everything with companies. Even though this movie, that's more so the follow up to Goldeneye, in Goldeneye in particular, there's a lot of stuff going on with Sean Bean that I can't even say read into. Like it's not subtext, it's text with him
Yeah.
where he's a defecting British man with a Russian past. So he's both a former spy and a Russian spy, occupying this weird space culturally where he's using he literally has a plant within the the Goldeneye system base. Boris is controlling everything on that front, while he has the brain over there with Gerald Oromov controlling the military, making sure that they some of them are on his side, and then other people are just basically pawns of the government. Not really knowing what Oromov is up to. Which, if you look in history, that's basically how a lot of false prophets, zealots, very controversial leaders. That's how they control things. Is that they show some people the truth, and they hide the truth from other people. And that's how you create division in the populace. And then, of course, you have Xenia Onatopp, who is both, I would argue, a little brain in a sense, but definitely more of the brawn, and delivers that. Speaking of Bondian tropes, the odd job Jaws of it all. While Boris is definitely the more of the era 90s villain, a 90s henchman rather, who
is the computer geek.
he's
That's what we were afraid of. We were afraid of the hacker.
yeah. And he's played comedically for a lot of it, even though I do think Boris is a great henchman in the film, and he's definitely memorable. I think Alan Cumming does an amazing job in that role. It's almost weird nowadays. It's like all of our villains are Boris's, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it really is kind of wild to think about. And what's fun about this is, and what I love about this movie in particular, is that you have all this technobabble, Goldeneye, all this stuff, and you also have this whole Russian general thing. But really, the villain is Trevelyan, and what he's up for is revenge, because his life got ruined by expanding, democracy, if you will. And he lost his family, he lost all this stuff, and so he decided the best way to get back is to infiltrate him and then turn it all on. Which was a very 90s thing. We were coming to a little bit of reconciliation with, like, okay, what's the cost of some of the things we've done? We talked about this on the Living Daylights. I don't know if you remember or not, but Bond gets a big helping hand from the Mujahideen in that movie, and that was a thing that happened in the 80s. We had Rambo doing that too, and a decade later, that didn't look like such a good idea. The Western world, which includes Great Britain at this point, the Allies, if you will, are having to come to grips with the fallout of the expansion of what they've done. And then, okay, we finally defeated the communist Russia. Now what? And the problem is that it splinters off into all these other things. So you kill one big spider, and now there's 50 other ones that are smaller. Yeah. They're not as powerful, but they're twice as annoying. And so how do you deal with that? And I love that that's a thematic element of this. It's really about revenge and coming to deal with vengeance. And one of the great things about the way Judi Dench plays him is that she says everything that everyone in the audience is thinking is like, is this even relevant anymore? And she's like, I don't know that it is. And I need you to prove that it is still. And I think in the back of her head, she knows it does matter. We still need the double O's. But I don't want this guy to think he's bigger than what he is. And if we're to kind of follow that James Bonds are all the same guy, doing all these things, he's had this whole track history of all this stuff he's done. And she's looking at him going, I don't know why we need you. I need you to prove yourself to me, and that it's not just about revenge for you. Because at this point, he doesn't know Alec is a bad guy. Yeah. He thinks he got killed by these guys. It's like, you can't go on some half-cocked revenge story. We don't do that anymore.
And it's 9 years before he actually has that conversation with M. Like, that was the cold open was 9 years before the events of this film.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's that time jump, and I love that they cover all of that, in this, and that's what makes the case file so interesting, is that it is about the Goldeneye tool and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, it's really not. It's about watching a master manipulator in Trevelyan use all these people for one thing. He's going to kill James, and he's going to kill MI6. And that's all he cares about. The rest of it, is just collateral damage to him. And that's what I think the smartest Bond movies, the best ones, are when there's all this big stuff going on, but it's really one guy with a real simple plan. So it's the thing that made Casino Royale brilliant was it was really just one guy trying to get himself from not getting killed.
Yeah, a middleman. The villain is literally a middleman in that movie. Because shout out to Lindsay Wilkins of Schlock and Awe. We did an episode on, which I think she said to me a few months back. It's one of the most listened to Schlock and Awe episodes to this day, which is we did Casino Royale and Glass Onion, and we talked about that, just how unlike a lot of Bond movies that can kind of get very convoluted and a little almost into the technobabble, spy babble, that one is very clear. It's very clean. It's one of the longer ones, but you follow the characters majority of the time, and I think that's why that movie is so good. And very similarly, again, directed by Martin Campbell. He's very good at getting things. I mean, it's very clear from the two times I've talked Bond on your show, Jay, that I'm really into Bond, that simple, down and dirty spy thing. That doesn't mean I don't like a lot of the goofier stuff. Like I think some people who've known me for a while, who've listened to me before, they know I'm a pretty big Octopussy fan. That's my that's my.
You and I are in the same boat. I love that movie. It's fun.
Oh yes, I didn't know that.
Look, Moore's my Bond. I mean, I love Connery stuff, but Moore was the guy I grew up with, so I saw that in theaters, dude. So with my dad. So yeah.
Oh man, we have to talk about that off mic because
well, just because we're doing this series, that means we can't do other Bonds someday. So we just put a pin in that one day. We'll come back and talk about it. But it's time to go to our next piece, though. We got to talk about the Bond girl, and this isn't the only time they've done this in the series, where they're going to go with a singular girl and they're going to give her a brain. And I love that. We talked about that. The original one is From Russia with Love, yes. And I love that they kind of revisit that trope here. I love Natalia in this movie because she has her own reasons, her own agency, but she's drop dead gorgeous. She's got all that going for her, but she's also like a useful help, not only from a tech side, she can fight and she's fun. Yes. And I gotta say, like, Alan Cumming is doing this big performance, and Isabella Scorupco is having to like be the straight man against that. And by all accounts, they do so many takes because she would crack up at him every time he would do one of his little gags. And she was so good at trying to play straight and play tough. And I love the chemistry that her and Brosnan have together, though, too. I really, really like her. She's a great, great, like, Bond girl, if you will.
Oh, I agree with everything you just said. In fact, I would argue that in a movie that has, really strong narrative strides, a movie that, again, we've established is prescient, a movie that, this movie slaps, quite frankly, from all angles. She is, I think, the best written character in the movie. I think Bond, incarnated by Brosnan, is, he does the job. He got the people in the audiences in '95 back on board with the franchise. He gave a new life to the franchise. He introduced people like myself to James Bond in many ways, if not most ways. But I think Natalia, watched this movie last night. I was like, she, in a franchise that has some problematic stuff in it throughout, and that kind of thing. She's one of the best Bond girls. I mean, by far. She actually, I thought about Tatiana Romanova for a little bit, but I thought a lot about Anya Amasova from The Spy Who Loved Me. I thought a lot about how, because different nationality than Bond, starkly different. She's not British. She's, Russian. She's a computer geek. Unlike Anya Amasova, who is kind of literally Bond's equal in every step of the way. I love that Natalia, one, she can fight, so she brings that aspect to it that a lot of Borises of the world don't really have. But she believes in something. She's very impassioned by peace and technology, and you definitely get the sense that whenever she meets James Bond, that not only does she just have a distrust of the men around her who are not a part of the facility base that she used to work at, that unfortunately all her friends are dead because of Boris and the people Boris is working for, Trevelyan. But you sense a real unease with the way that some of the stuff that Bond does through her. And she's almost like a great audience surrogate. The first hour of the movie, you're following her a lot of the time because what got me about rewatching it was Bond and Rory Kinnear. I forgot his character's name. My goodness, he appears all throughout the Brosnan era, but it's them two and then Judi Dench. They're all just like watching the destruction of the facility base, just from the MI6 office, and yet we're actually seeing Natalia in it. We're seeing the explosions. We're seeing the people, be shot to death from the computers. Like we're seeing. I laugh because on the top, she's getting off on all this, quite frankly, and it's bizarre and heartbreaking, and it really gets you into Natalia's arc in a huge way. And so when she gets caught by Boris eventually, and you know what's going to happen after that, it adds tension to a franchise that I think struggles a bit in especially in this era as far as like generating that tension, because we all know Bond is going to get out of it. That's the fun of it. But actually caring for the characters by putting all that into the Bond girl, I think is really amazing.
Yeah, I tell you how I've always read her, and particularly now after seeing these last couple of times, she's Leia from Star Wars. I mean, think about it. The first hour
Wow.
of this movie, what happens? They fire the Goldeneye to make sure it works, and they blow up her home, more or less. She's the only one left, and then she joins the Resistance, and she can more than hold her own. And she has to talk them, back into it too, because there's that great scene on the beach with Brosnan where he's kind of lost in his own brooding. Which Brosnan's a great brooder, by the way. Really, really got a he really is, and she's bringing it out of him, and all he wants to do is make out with her. She's like, "No, you're going to talk to me." Yeah, and he does. He opens
What are
up
you
there.
gonna do? Kill him? Like that's it?
Yeah,
It's
exactly. Yeah, and so
great
she brings
dialogue.
the humanity to it. And I think you're right. She's the one that has the big arc in this, and they don't ever say it. But in my retcon head, I'm like, she just went to work for MI6 after this. Like they're like, okay, now you're heading up the computer crimes division. Congratulations, and that's where she landed. But she's so much fun in this. But I've always read her as Princess Leia, and she almost gets played that way a little bit too. I don't know if they told her that. I've never seen that anywhere, but it's always just being a big Star Wars nut. It just sort of felt the same. I was like, it's the same thing. They blow up her home planet, and then her arch villain's out there, and yeah, she's just gonna go and deal with all of it now.
That's a fascinating comparison. I love that. I love that because I think the original Star Wars is such a brilliant mix of different character archetypes. I mean, I just this is a little off topic, but I rewatched The Mummy recently, the Brendan Fraser one, and
It's a
I
great
feel like
movie.
that,
Mm.
yeah, that romance is between Frasier and Mrs. Daniel Craig, as a matter of
Mm-hmm.
fact. To me, is very, to me, it's blatantly Han and Leia, like
Oh,
straight up,
totally. Yeah.
like that, like it's ripped right out of that. So I do think you do get through the influence of the osmosis of cinema that would definitely have to seep into the screenwriters' minds. And also, too, something to note is this is unlike all the other movies after this, because I think Tomorrow Never Dies. This is me being a Bond nerd right now. Neil, what is it? Purvis and Wade, that screenwriting
Mm-hmm.
duo, they would do every Bond movie in some way, shape, or form. They would have little screenwriting partners here or there for some movies.
Yeah.
Ever since Tomorrow Never Dies, but with this one, it's Michael France, who
Yep.
was a pretty big guy at the time in the writing world because he did a Cliffhanger. He co-wrote that with Stallone, which kind of brought Stallone back out of before he went back down again. Stallone often does, and he also did some uncredited screenwriting work on X-Men. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, France was
But
always playing around with like certain ideas, and I think France does a
mhm.
really good job in all three of those movies of making those characters very likable and affable on screen. So
Yeah, and then you've got Bruce Firestein and Jeffrey Kane who added the great quippy, snappy dialogue to make it all
yes,
flow. With the story and stuff. It all worked, and they added a lot of the Natalia character in there. Let's talk about our villains. We've talked a little bit about Alec, and we've mentioned General Oromov, but let's talk about you know dead meat Sean Bean, as it were, as Alex Trevelyan, the head of Janus. Also, man, I just love this dude, and I really like this villain for Bond because it's personal in a lot of ways. It's very personal for him. It's personal for James too, and you got to get the right kind of actor to do that, because otherwise it
yes,
just comes off as mustache twirly and kind of goofy. Whereas Sean Bean knows exactly when to dial it up and dial it back. You'd seen him do this a few years before if you saw Patriot Games, because that's a very personal Jack Ryan, adventure where that guy's brother got killed by Ryan and he is hell bent for leather to go get him, And so when he showed up as in this movie, I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely the bad guy. Like I didn't even know, and I was like, yeah, he's got to be the bad guy, right? And when he turns out to be, it's like, of course it's him, and he's just exquisite as this villain. I love this guy.
Yeah, no, Sean Bean, one of the great villain actors. By the time I saw Goldeneye, he was already like Boromir in the Lord of the Rings franchise. By that point, so like that was I want to say that was my introduction to Sean Bean was Lord of the Rings before James Bond. But I mean, this movie helped crystallize that in my mind. And I mean, the thing I think about Bond villains, we kind of touched upon it a little bit when we talked about From Russia with Love the first time around, but Kleb is such a different, like that's still the second movie in the series. The Bond villain archetype wasn't defined, in my opinion, until Goldfinger and definitely Thunderball.
I agree.
Whereas Sean Bean is definitely rooted from that later tradition where, it's a great concept. You would think that by the time you would get so many movies in, it's like, why not have a rogue, a 00 agent be a Bond villain? That's a great concept, and he delivers on that. I love the iconography of half his face being burned.
Yeah.
What that means as far as the Yanis goes, how he becomes Yanis because of that burn, and what that also means for his viewpoint on James for the past 9 years and how that's factored into his plan. How he wants to recruit James, but he's also just like, I was gonna do that, but you're James Bond. You're not gonna do. You're a blunt instrument of the government, which this series talks about a lot and is true to James Bond. And Trevelyan is just such a great foil for Bond in so many ways because Sean Bean's handsome. Like, let's admit it, he's a good-looking dude. So you believe that whenever he's making these unwanted advances towards Natalia, when he's saying things like we used to share the same women, yada yada, you're like, oh yeah, they definitely had to have done that. James Bond, especially in the 60s, come on now, he was definitely doing some shit he wasn't supposed to be doing.
Oh look, he's the again the Yanis idea. He's the opposite of James Bond. Is the other side of the coin. They're the same train thing. They're 006 and 007. He's just the evil Spock, if you will. That's what he is in this. And he plays it so good. But what makes him so good, I think, as a villain, not just Sean Bean's portrayal, but the way he's written, is that when you listen to him for a minute, you're like, he's kind of making some sense. Like his methods are twisted, but I get it. I'm not saying I agree, but I understand, and that to me has always been the most compelling part of a Bond villain. When you're like, well, I don't agree with that, but I get it, and you mentioned it before. I mean, Connery got 3 in a row that with Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice that were just banger villains. Because, I mean, you've always had Blofeld hanging around, but then Donald Pleasance just makes that a whole new thing. And then I love Thunderball. It's one of my favorite ones. And I love the villain in that and the way it's set up. And then, of course, Goldfinger, how can you not? I mean, he's the icon of all these guys. I mean, he starts it off because he's the first one that's like, it's just all about the money. He's like, I don't care about all this politics garbage. I just want the money, and that's what makes it fun. And then you flip the other side of it, having General Aramov, he's this, megalomaniac, military rogue general, right? He's got his own men. He's basically got his own private army at this point. And his whole thing is he wants to restore, the Stalin era and all this stuff. He wants to bring it all back, but he does it without being, again, that mustache twirling villain. He's cold. He's he just shoots guys in the head like it's no big deal. And that's what makes him so formidable.
I love the way that actor plays it as well, because I love that he's the character he's the villain who wears fear the most in his face. Even Boris, Alan Cumming hides it behind his comedic demeanor, which is a strength of Alan Cumming as an actor. Both Oramov, you see in that sequence where he's talking to his boss, and he's just like, oh wait, there was another person. It wasn't just Boris. Like there was another person who escaped. Hold up. And then also you see that fear whenever we'll get to it in a bit, but like the tank chase, he's like trying to do everything he can because he realizes in that moment, oh my God, James Bond is an unstoppable force. And
Yeah.
I've got to put this man down, literally.
I mean, he's seen what he can do. He was in that chemical facility where they were making the turn to get Trevelyan out. He knows how dangerous he can be. And so that's
Yeah.
why he's always telling his men, like, you better take this seriously. I've seen what this guy can do. You know, but that's what you like about him, right? And then they each have like their own hench person, in this. Like
Yeah.
Alec has Xenia, which we got to talk about Famke Jensen. This was my introduction to her. And like her entire performance, and she said this herself, she said, they told me you're going to shoot a lot of guns and you basically need to act like you're having an orgasm every time you kill somebody. And I was like, what a hell of direction to give somebody, but she just eats it up, man. And it's crazy because it's just so out there. It's Jaws, and all that kind of stuff, and some of the goofier things. But it's also menacing because she's just as menacing as Odd Job, and she'll kill everything. And when she meets James Bond and they're in that sauna, and she's basically squeezing him to death between her legs. That's a wild scene, man. That's one of the most violent, like, eat your heart out, Basic Instinct. Is all I'm saying.
Well, this franchise up until this point, it's been lousy with not lousy, loused. Excuse me, that's the right word I'm looking for. With these Bond girl slash villain characters, like you brought up You Only Live Twice earlier, and I automatically in my brain I was like, oh yeah, James Bond literally has to kill her like later in the movie. Like I think he like throws a rocket launcher, like shoots a rocket at her and it blows up because like they had sex and then she betrayed him and because she's working for Spectre,
You're
yada
doing like
yada.
Aki, yeah. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So
She's the agent, yeah. So
yeah, and there's several people like that in the franchise up to this point, but I feel like definitely with Famke Janssen, I think Famke Janssen in general, much like Sean Bean, works best whenever you put them in a character where they can like really play both sides where they can
yeah.
like operate those murky waters.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about her in Rounders too, where she's
Mm-hmm.
she's technically a good like she likes Matt Damon and stuff like that in the movie, but she's operating a big part of this underground underworld essentially. And with this movie, I love that she actually reminds me the most of Jaws in The Spy Who Loved Me specifically, not so much Moonraker because I think
Mm-hmm.
Moonraker, for my taste, I know some people have affection for it, it veers off a little too jokey for my taste. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Spy Who Loved Me, I feel like Jaws is the perfect mix of goofy and scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the way in which she like squeezes that dude, like it goes from being like the sex scene into being like, oh, like what is? Wait, no, she's like legit killing him. She's like, he's like trying to tell her, and she won't listen. And of course, we see the darkly comic expression on the corpse's face when Bond finds it later on, and everything that she does and says is just so messed up. But I mean,
Yeah.
she's a great villainess. She really is.
I mean, she's Oromo's like best creation, but also the thing he's probably the most scared of ever having been a part of. She's this badass soldier, but she's also just this out of her mind killer, right? And it's such a good contrast to Alex hench person, which is Boris, who is just this goof, because it's Alan Cumming. That's why it's played that way. But I love it because this would be the kind of guy that Alec could turn, right? It don't take much to get hacker culture's kind of buck the system anyway, right? Just I mean, at least in the '90s, that was our whole thing about it until we
Now
created
it's
like
become
career
insult
paths for it now, But I mean, really, like this is exactly the kind of guy you can turn because he doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't have an ethos. It's like, oh, you're going to pay me a lot of money and I get to wreck everything with a computer, of course, and that's what makes him fun.
I think back in the '90s and the 2000s, we called it hacker culture. I think nowadays we kind of call it like incel culture in a lot of ways,
Yeah,
where
there's some of that, yeah.
yeah, there's this movie's definitely predicting a lot of that.
Oh,
Where
yeah.
there's that there's that funny line where Natalia's friend at the beginning is like, "Oh, he wouldn't know a woman if he shot on his head," and it's just like, "Oh wow, like this guy definitely doesn't get out anywhere. He literally lives on a computer all the time." even when things are blown up in the actual Mishka station at the end, like Boris tries to go away, and then Alex like, no, hey, come here, point this gun at him. If he moves, kill him. That kind of thing. Like he's at that computer the entire time, and it's kind of freaky to watch, especially when
Yeah.
we live in an era where everything is so screen dominated. I mean, right
Mhm.
now people can't see me, but like I'm literally talking to you, Jay, with blue light glasses because I've been.
Well, yeah, I've got the protector over my screen as we're talking about
Oh,
this.
man.
Yeah, it's I mean, you're right. And what I love about him though is the way he gets characterized. Because he's constantly like flipping a pen through his fingers and he's typing with one hand and he's just all over which is ridiculous. But it's funny because you got to remember the people watching this who are like my age and stuff. My introduction to a computer hacker was Matthew Broderick in War Games. So I had seen that,
Wow.
and I'm like, okay, so that's sort of like the king archetype of all this stuff, and this is what that begat 15 years later, almost. And so what does that look like with him? And and again, I love his whole thing, and he's constantly doing the pin. We'll talk about the exploding pin in a minute because it's his foil, but I don't know, man. I like if Xenia is violent and kind of scary, like the Jaws and Spy Who Loved Me, who's pretty much a horror villain, in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. Then Boris is the funny, and you've got to have the levity in this, and it's such a good balance in this, and it's I don't know, man. I really dig it, and it's a good segue into talking about some of the gadgets. We've talked about a lot of the people here. This is not a gadget heavy Bond, but there are some cool ones. So they get the Aston Martin DB5 back out. We get that going. James has to seduce a woman, of course, because that's just what he does. And he's driving that thing all over the place. A
Hey,
great
stop this
inset.
car at once. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I love how he's doing that. But you talk about something that was controversial in the Bond world. When they flipped to that BMW Z3 later on, oh my gosh, he cannot drive a BMW, but of course he can because he's James Bond, and that car, I kid you not, I started, and maybe it's just priming, but I started seeing that car in places that I'd never seen it before after that. And I didn't grow up in like a big city or anything. So when I would go to one, I would see those running around. And they talk about it like the sales of those things went through the roof when this movie came out. So that's something that really, really hit better than they thought it would.
Is this the introduction of the Omega Watch? Because
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
Omega is like a big thing throughout
Hmm.
Craig's movie.
Yep,
Okay.
this is the Omega watch with the laser, which they've had laser watches and stuff, but making it the Omega watch, like it had its whole campaign. You'd see it
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah, that one's out there. You have that. You have the Tiger helicopter. It's not really a gadget. James Bond just steals a Russian tank. I mean that's not really a gadget, but it's
Well,
cool that it gets used.
and you brought up the pin earlier with Boris, which like later on we see that with the explosive pin. That the I call it the Q pin essentially
It is
because
the Q
we
pin.
see it again
Yeah.
in Skyfall as well, and I love that in both movies. There's actually a lot of similarities between Goldeneye and Skyfall. I think part of that is because Skyfall is the 50th anniversary film, so and I'm sure you're going to talk about this with Matt whenever he comes on, but
Hmm.
like each component of Skyfall is deliberately placed to tribute every Bond movie, even the ones that people don't care for as much,
Yep.
which I respect. I don't love it when sequels, Rise of Skywalker, just completely ignore, just completely, or
Yeah.
like people don't like the last one, so fuck that movie. Like, no,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't. I don't
I
like.
hate that too. What's funny about this exploding pin thing, because they've had these before, is it becomes a joke in Casino Royale. Because when the
Yeah,
new Q is sitting there, what were you looking for? An exploding pin? We don't really go for that anymore. And I was like, that's cute and kind of fun. It's like you give me a gun and a radio. Yeah, we're bringing it back to reality, but back in this Bond, of course there's an exploding pin, and it's a great gag because when you click it 3 times, it arms it. You got to click it again to turn it off. And Boris is always
yeah.
clicking that thing, and James is like, somebody please get that out of his hand. And when he finally bum rushes the guy and throws it behind him to blow everything up, it's a great move because you know that that's a timer that is going to get set off. It's a really, really good little screenwriting device encapsulated in just a cheap little pin, and it's a blast,
And
literally.
also with the pen and the Q watch. Well, actually, I think the pen actually becomes this in Skyfall, whereas in this movie, it's the watch where Alex sees it and he's like, "Oh, Q, this is definitely a Q creation. Does it still do this?" And he unarms the bomb for a bit. And I bring that up because in this context, because I feel like these gadgets in this movie, again, it's not gadget dominate Bond, but I feel like these gadgets are like these are old dog new tricks, and that's a theme running throughout this film and Skyfall in particular, where this is that kind of a guy's worst nightmare in the context of a franchise, which is a guy's. I hate to be, pardon me for being foul, Jay, but this franchise is a guy's wet dream essentially, and this is that horror story that every guy experiences or is afraid of, where this evil that's from my past is coming in to basically mess up the bliss that I have now and
Exactly.
ruining my mission and ruining my excursions and and that kind of thing. And I feel like what the gadgets serve is a reminder of what was before, while Brosnan is having to play everything very modern. In while balancing better, I think even though I love Brosnan, but I love other Bonds more than Brosnan. I feel like Brosnan still did the best job of balancing the serious with the silly, and this movie really encompasses that tone. The gadgets are definitely a component of that.
You've hit on something that, Preston, is really astute, is that this movie is about recognizing everything that this series has been up to this point and then bringing it forward to a modern place. So moving from the Aston Martin to the BMW, going into the Omega watch, it's branded, things like that. And even bringing back Jodan Baker, who had been the bad guy in Living Daylights, to now be the Felix Leiter type guy. He's the fun guy. He's Jack Wade. He's goofy, and he's Jodan Baker. Exactly. He's just funny. And so you bring him back in, and it's like, oh, okay, we're going to play this. I don't know. As somebody who grew up on like serialized television that was made in the 60s and things and like reruns and stuff, like if you ever watched the Andy Griffith Show, there's a group of actors that just play multiple people on that all the time. Like sometimes they're the good guys, sometimes they're the barber, sometimes they're the milkman, sometimes they're the thief, And so I'm used to seeing like just the play of people, the people in the theater, the repertoire, coming through. And I feel like Bond is trying to do that here, because you're right. The central thesis is that your past is going to come back to you, and how you deal with it is going to determine what your future is. Whereas Trevelyan cannot let go of his past, and it's driving him into this vengeance thing. Yeah. James is reconciling his past a lot with Natalia's help, and realizing I'm not just an axe that the government wields. I'm a tool, and I can make choices, and I'm going to make the right ones. And so it's fun to watch that and see how that come forward, because, much like with gadgets, there's not a huge travelogue. We get St. Petersburg, which looks great, go through the square.
That's true.
Get a little Switzerland, get a little Cuba, the Bahamas, Monte Carlo is kind of fun. But these aren't places we haven't seen before, as James Bond. Like, we've been to all these places, except maybe St. Petersburg, in the way it's done here. But it's cool to see that the travelogue doesn't matter this time. It's really about these people. And of all the Bond movies in particular, this one really focuses on these characters a lot. And that's what I like about it. Like that ending is awesome. They got the submerged satellite dish and all this stuff and the big fight and everything. And I mean, you talk about killing Sean being dead. We throw him on the bottom of that and then crash the satellite through him. Yeah, I mean, he's super dead.
Perfect. Oh my goodness. Yeah. That shot's amazing. Like, man.
But it's also kind of personal too, though, because it's about that character. It's not about all that other crap. It's about that character. And then even like, good old Invincible Boris, what happens to him? He gets Terminator 2. He's the frozen nitrogen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty rough. And, Onatopp gets blown out of the sky. I mean, that's some violent, gory deaths.
That's what got me about the whole kind of last 30 minutes of this movie, starting off with the last time we see Xenia, and Bond does the thing that James Bond does, which is if he can't, kill you, or if he can't take you out, he's going to find an object that's going to lead into your death. And the way that he literally squeezes her to death while killing the guy who rode the helicopter that she was a passenger of is a pretty creative way to kill someone, I must say. James Bond for the next Jason Voorhees movie. Anyways, jokes aside, though, I was pretty surprised at and I've seen this movie many times. This movie was such a big part of my youth and my formative journey through loving Bond at the beginning. I feel like the last 30 minutes is so small scale, but I don't care, like you said. Like, I love that we see these big set pieces, the tank chase, which the tank chase I think is, to me, I put in my notes, it rivals. It's up there with the parkour chase from Casino Royale, the ski chase in Spy Who Loved Me, the even the train fight in From Russia with Love, which is I think is again smaller scale, but is such an important pivotal fight for the franchise. The tank chase is right up there with that. It just captures everything I love about the fantasy of James Bond. And I love that everything after that, it climaxes in just a fight on an island on top of a satellite, basically. And I feel like I wish more action movie climaxes. We're just getting out of the Marvel era and stuff like that, the Marvel heyday, rather, where there were the big CG finale was such a big thing for movies for the past 10 years or so. I like that this movie is kind of taking it back to basics and competing with those diehards and those speeds and those total recalls, where it's just keeping everything simple down to basics. Because, as you said, the real star of this movie, besides Brosnan, is the script and is the themes. And Bond, I think what separates Bond from other action franchises is that it's rooted in that spy espionage thriller. It's very timely. I just love where this movie takes Bond thematically as a franchise and that kind of thing. And I love this is, I mean, it's meant to be funny, and it is funny, but the Roger Moore style ending though, where Jack Wade's like, well, you're gonna, you can debrief each other in Guantanamo. It's just, it's perfect, and their faces are perfect at the end, and it's just such a great shot in a series of great shots. And I've always loved the way that this movie concludes and the way that it gets you into the end credits. I think it's classic Bond at that point.
I mean, it's a great start to a new era of Bond. I mean, so many of these we've done. We've only talked about one other one that was the start of an era, because you can't. Lazenby was just a one and done. So we only talked about Living Daylights as the first one. All the other ones I've done in the series have been one that's in the middle, or along the way and stuff like that, or like a linchpin one. And when we talk about the Craig, we're talking about Skyfall. We've already done Casino Royale and Film Strip, so we didn't pull that one out. And it's neat the way that this one starts that new era. And they had started this, movies before, because they realized they kept putting a title of a movie up where James Bond was going to return, and then they would change their mind, later on. And so after this, they no longer are working off of the Fleming stuff anymore. They're having to go into new ventures. So like, James Bond will return. Don't worry, we're coming back. We're going to do this again. And you knew they were, and it's just like a big triumphant ending, at the end of this. And this movie has it's personal, when Bond kills Trevelyan, that hurts, to have to do that, but it ends on such a joke and a lift with Jack Wade and him and Natalia, and with, Frozen Boris, everybody kind of got their comeuppance in some way, but it ends on such a bright lift, and it's bright daylight, and all that stuff. I really like that, because it's the best of the Moors ended in bright daylight, and stuff like that. And, we're going to kind of sail off into the sunset or whatever it is. And I don't know, it just makes it so much more fun when you get to that point with these Bonds, like we said. So we are at the part, it's time to talk about final thoughts about the movie. We're not doing the popcorn rating thing on this. So just your kind of wrap up thoughts on Goldeneye, and maybe even Brosnan as a Bond.
Ooh, okay, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. My final thoughts on the movie itself. I think Goldeneye is awesome, quite frankly. I think it's safe to say at this point, maybe not when it came out, but 30 years later, I think this has become, over time, one of the most iconic, I would say top 5 most iconic Bond movies. Part of that's the video game adaptation, which is a watershed in first-person shooters. But I definitely think for giving Bond a new face, giving Bond these complex thematics that they had flirted with in a previous iteration, but for the time before reevaluating did not work for a lot of people. I think this movie is, in that manner, a precursor to what we just had with Craig, what just wrapped up a few years ago with Craig. And I think this movie, much like the best Bond films of every era, I feel like this movie does rival some of the best action adventure blockbusters of this era. I do put this up there with the Point Breaks and the Campbell directed Mask of Zorros and the Toll Recalls and stuff like that. I think this movie does play up with those movies. Just like Goldfinger, I think is even though it predates the current action movie trend that really began in the 80s, it still stands up against like the Dirty Dozens and stuff like that that were coming out at that time. And so it's just such a personal movie to me, just as a Bond fan, as a fan of blockbuster cinema. I feel like the movie landscape would be less interesting if James Bond didn't exist, because he is the one of the only action heroes who, much like Godzilla, quite frankly, is able to be adapted to any era and reflect that era. And I think this movie is quite frankly, one of the 5 best examples of that. Great villains all around, great performances. The introduction of not only Brosnan but Judi Dench as, in my opinion, the best M. Quite frankly, and again, Natalia Sononova is just a fantastic love interest. And so I really do think this is an amazing movie. And as far as Brosnan goes, I'm forever a fan of his, specifically because he introduced me to James Bond. I feel like if I'm giving my transparent final thoughts, pleasantries aside, I would say that I love Goldeneye. I actually like Tomorrow Never Dies a lot more than I did as a kid, because I think the prescience has helped that movie quite a bit in esteem. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as this, and I think the flaws of that movie is where you start to see what would grow into the problems with Die Another Day, which is that by this point in the Bond canon, they ran out of Fleming novels and short stories to adapt. I actually think, yeah, Octopussy and the Living Daylights, that book was the last one that they, before they got the rights to the first novel, License to Kill, after that. But I think you start to see a spinning of the wheel of Bond plots where they just get more and more ridiculous. But say what you will about those later movies, I know everyone has their opinions. A franchise this long in the tooth, everyone's gonna have their favorites, their least favorites, whatever. Brosnan's never bad in any of them, and he always treats this character with respect, with reverence, and I really do think time has been kind to Brosnan, both as a Bond and as an actor. I think as an actor, he's underrated. The World's End, the long, almost said Long Kiss Goodnight, the Long Good Friday is an amazing British gangster classic, which I adore.
Hey, that remake of Thomas Crown Affair he's in ain't bad at all. That's a fun movie to watch.
Good movie. Good movie. Yeah, Brosnan's a great movie star, and I feel like with his Bond, especially in this movie, you see, okay, this guy can do the charisma, he can do the action, he can do the depth, but he can bring that dramatic heft that a lot of his roles nowadays really tap into, and he wasn't doing that as much in the 90s. And I feel like you get the best of both worlds with Brosnan, and I feel like his era, in retrospect, I wish he had. It's such a weird period for action movies, especially when The Matrix came out in '99, that I feel like they kind of had to get CG driven after that, even though The Matrix, the first one, is very practical for the most part. And they were torn around with CG all throughout this decade, much to this movie's detriment, if I'm being honest. Just some of the Earth shots, I think, just don't age well on a big screen, but the rest of the movie does. And Brosnan's performance as Bond is in this movie, I think, is one of the best James Bond performances of all time. So that concludes my thoughts on Goldeneye.
You said something in there that is really kind of the linchpin of my thought. They minted a movie star with James Bond again. Sean Connery got minted as a movie star because of this. Roger Moore got minted as a movie star because of this.
Yeah.
Dalton had already been in stuff. He was a stage guy. Brosnan was a TV star that had done a few movies, yeah, but he was a TV star. Can we really pin this on a TV star? A kind of a rom-com spy type show? Yes, yes, you can, if you give him the right script. And that's what I feel about Brosnan in particular. Is it bothers me that he only got 4 movies, and I feel like he got 2.5 good scripts. And that's part of the Moore problem too. Is he got some campy stuff and he just dealt with it. It wasn't his fault. The first 3 movies he's in were Connery type movies. They didn't know what to do, and then they finally got it right, and then they veered off into the weirdness, and then they finally went back. For my money, like for Your Eyes Only and Octopussy are a great twofer. For more. And I feel like this one, I think Tomorrow Never Dies, even though the plot's a little wacky, works really well. I don't really love The World Is Not Enough. It's just kind of mean and dark, but I actually think Die Another Day's got a good idea that just gets lost in its own sauce a little bit because it becomes about a lot of things that it shouldn't be, but it can be fun on a level.
It's
But
not a turkey like people say it is. Like, I think,
yeah, it's not garbage. It's just a little goofy. But,
yeah, I would say the first like 30, 40 minutes, even I'd say, like, has a lot of strong stuff. The sword fight, the beginning, like with the that cold open, I think is besides the CGI is decent. Like
it's the invisible car, man. That's what everybody hates about that movie.
Yeah.
That's where it's like we got a little far off and that happens with these. But you said it too. They got a movie star who doesn't give a bad performance. And Brosnan himself will say, like, when they told me it was over, I was like, well, glad I got to do it. He's just one of those guys that you can just watch him in anything. And he's a movie star. He's just a good actor and he's fun. And this is an incredible cast that they put around him. I mean, you can't get a better setup for a guy to take on a franchise. So I echo all the things you said. And I really love Goldeneye. It's a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to revisit it here as part of this special series. So Preston, once again, thank you for being a part of this. Tell folks how they can follow you and all the great work that you're doing out there on the internet.
Oh, absolutely. Please find me on Blue Sky at Presto. Presto. Same as my old Twitter name. And then also find me on Letterboxd at Presto_MITCH, where I'm always logging movie reviews and stuff like that. I'm actually in the process of creating kind of a film essay project that's most likely going to be on Substack. No word as to when the exact release date will be. But right now, the stories I've got coming along, I actually showed Jay off mic some of the notes I've been creating for one of them, and I feel like I've got some good stuff coming. So if you follow me on either of those platforms, I'll definitely be linking to that whenever that's up. Podcasts go, as far as that goes, I am going to be on one of the last episodes of the Film Piece podcast, Matt Bledsoe's podcast, where Carmelita Valdez McCoy and myself, last year we covered, the year before last, we talked about what were the 10 discoveries of that we made in 2023. And that was a lot of fun to be able to do. Matt invited both of us to do that. Very privileged to both be a friend and, a common guest of Matt during that podcast. Jay, thank you again for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh, listen, the pleasure's all mine, my friend. And we'll link all of that in the show description. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our co-host emeritus, if you will, Kurt, is an incredible follow on Letterboxd. Preston is right up there with him in terms of film critique and writing and stuff. So you need to follow both of them and read their stuff because it's an education. And I love watching your reviews and reading them when they come up. It always pops up on the old feed, and I'll read yours and a few others and Kurt's in particular. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts here, and can't wait to have you back on the big roundtable Bond sessions as we wrap all of this up. You mentioned it. Our friend Matt Bledsoe is going to come in and wrap this up with the Craig era with me. We're going to talk Skyfall. Really excited about that. And then again, having all you guys back on to wrap up Bond as it was a part of 00 Film Strip here. Of course, folks, you can follow this show on social media everywhere at Film Strip Pod and find this and all the other episodes in our archives. 400 episodes plus at this point and 15 years of podcasts. Wherever you find your podcasts, we're on Spotify, Apple, we're on YouTube now. Anywhere you can get a podcast, you can find our stuff. Go ahead and subscribe to that YouTube channel too. That's doing a lot better than we thought it would. Really excited to get people to do that. You don't get to see us, but if you want to listen to the show through that medium, we're all about that as well. Until next time, thank you for listening to 00 Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.